Hello, I'm Meg Wasmer. I am the co-owner of Copper Dog Books in Beverly, Massachusetts. And thank you for joining us tonight for Boston.com's book club discussion of Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi. Hey Tochi, thank you for being with us, friend. How are you?
My absolute pleasure. I am doing wonderfully. I think I turned my video on too early. I totally planned on making a big grand entrance and was going to cue up some applause and everything, but I think we're good. I think we're good.
It's totally good. You saved me from stress reading this entire introduction, which I overthought, so this is great. You want to just jump right in? Do some
Let's
talk
do it
Riot
to it.
Baby a little bit?
Yeah.
So I read Riot Baby really, really early. I got my copy at Book Expo, your first signing at Book Expo, and then I saw you again 2 days later at the second weekend one. I don't think I was really your target audience when you wrote this book. I don't think you were like, let me write this book for nice white ladies. When you sat down and were like, I'm going to write this awesome book, who was your reader that you were writing for?
Really, I was writing for myself. It was the type of thing that was more a cathartic act than, I'm going to intentionally produce a product that I am then going to sell, right? Really, where I was at the time that I started writing it, probably, fall of 2015 going into 2016, I was in and like a lot of Black Americans at the time, I imagine, in a very sort of dark place emotionally, because at the time there was this whole spate of videographic evidence of officer-involved killings of Black Americans. It was just over and over and over again, and there would be this whole process where the video footage would come on, and then the officers would be named, and either they would be put on desk duty or paid administrative leave or whatever. There would be no consequences, and then almost before we could finish grieving that, there would be another, and then another, and another. And I knew at the time that the stuff that was going on inside of me, the stuff that was roiling inside of me, I needed to get out. And writing is often how I process things, particularly things like grief. And so Riot Baby was almost like, it's not a substitute for therapy, but it was therapy-ish. And so at the end of the day, I wrote Riot Baby for myself. I needed to help myself. It was one of those sort of physician heal thyself type of initiatives, and I think it says something that it's been so widely appreciated.
When you were awarded the New England Book Award this year, I remember you very clearly saying, I didn't set out to write a timely book. Like, this stewed for years, and the timing must have been a real challenge. What was the hardest part of Riot Baby coming out in 2020?
Oh man, I mean, I think if the book is timely, it speaks more to the times than to the book. I started writing it 2015, sold it in 2018, and it came out in 2020. And everything that was going on around the time that it was published, or the year that it was published, was also going on the year that it was written, was also going on the year that it was sold. So, I mean, and it also speaks to one of the big themes that I set out to explore with Riot Baby, which is the sort of interminability of it. There's this whole legacy, this whole genealogy of oppression of Black Americans, particularly through police and incarceration. So I wanted to trace a lot of that. And for me, one of the sort of signal moments was when I was thinking about, because initially the story was Kev's story, and it followed him. The Riker section was like the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the book. And my editor, Roshi Chen at Tor.com, Galaxy Brain entity, she encouraged me to think more about Ella as well, and to think about where Ella had come from, what life was like for Ella before Harlem. And so it got me thinking, and I realized when I was thinking about their ages, the ages of Ella and Kev, I realized, wait a second, Ella and I are about the same age, which means she would have been alive for Rodney King. And that would have been a very formative memory for her, just as it was a very formative memory for me. And so that, when I thought about it, Rodney King was one of the very first like political memories I ever remember having. Like it was they would show the footage on I have this distinct memory of, the morning before school, they were showing the footage of him being beaten on the Today Show, like as mom's like dressing me for school and everything. And of course, at the time, I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand the import of everything like that. But, going through everything that I went through at the sort of midpoint of this decade, and then looking back, to 1992, it was like the same thing over and over again. And I remember too that a lot of people at the time of Rodney King were talking about how the fact that there was videographic evidence, right? That was the new thing. That was the big thing, right? Like that was the thing that was going to make this so different than every other time that it's happened before, and it didn't. And so like that it would like it was the same thing. It was happening over and over and over again. And so I don't know, it didn't, there was a part of me, and I wrote an essay for Tor.com after George Floyd was killed, and sort of in the immediate aftermath of the uprising in Minneapolis. And I spoke about this, how, the stuff that I was feeling in 2020 was the exact same stuff I was feeling when I started writing Riot Baby. And so what did that mean for me as a Black writer? What did it mean for me in terms of my relationship with writing, and the idea of writing as a sort of social good versus the idea of writing as a sort of vehicle for personal salvation and deliverance? I don't know, this is kind of a long-winded answer.
No, it's a hard book to talk about because it's really like, this is actually, the segues beautifully into my next question. Like, it is a deeply literary science fiction book, which I loathe saying because I'm kind of like, I have a complicated relationship with fic lit. I am a science fiction reader, and Riot Baby is clearly, it is near future dystopian sci-fi. It is deeply grounded in this world, but it is clearly like, it is not straight fiction. But something that's been amazing about Riot Baby is that it has really, it's genre bridged. I can hand it to a lit fic reader and they'll come back and be like, I don't like sci-fi, but I really liked this. Like, exactly. What do you think, I think we're living in a golden age of sci-fi. I think that we're getting sci-fi that is like nothing that has ever been published. Where do you think that we're going to see things like Riot Baby that are truly bridge books find their way into the great literary canon? Like, is it sci-fi's time?
Oh man, I mean, we could make this the whole talk. I was very, very, very fortunate in that one of the few like writing classes I took in college was I got to study under John Crowley, who is most famous for Little Big, which I believe won the World Fantasy Award in like 1980 or 81. Anyway, it's a fantasy novel about a guy that marries into a family of fairies, but it's got some of the most gorgeous sentences I've ever read in my entire life. I first picked up that book. I was in Morocco. This was summer of 2006. I was in Rabat. I was studying Arabic, and they had the sort of center that I was studying at had this sort of makeshift library where people who were passing through or whatever would like leave books. And it was basically a library built out of that. And I saw Little Big there because I saw that John Crowley was going to be teaching a class the following semester. And I was like, oh, I'm going to study with him. Let me like do some homework. And it would be in the middle of like afternoon Arabic class, and I would have the book under the table, and I would be nudging the classmate next to me like, yo, this is the most beautiful sentence in the world. And then like the next page, this is the most beautiful sentence in the world. This is the most beautiful sentence in the world. And so and that was a very formative experience for me because by then I'm already writing science fiction. I'm already writing fantasy. a lot of my storytelling inspiration is Toonami. You know, it's the anime that I'm watching on Cartoon Network, right?
Right.
I'm learning how to tell stories from Gundam Wing and Dragon Ball Z and Thundercats and Sailor Moon. And here's this book that's fantastical and that just, I don't know, I can, if I'm reading beautiful sentences, it engenders a physical sensation inside me. Like it feels good. And I love producing those things, those sentences. And so that is one of the reasons why my diet is so heavily infused with literary fiction. You know, I can, you know, I think Jesmyn Ward is like the greatest Southern writer living right now, possibly that American fiction has like ever seen, right? But I think also too, I'm very much inspired by people like Gene Wolfe, right? Who, you know, very, very, very literary science fiction, very illusion heavy, right? But also too, like that is, you know, reading a book like that, it feels like I have permission to like have fun with sentences and play with sentences and just like produce sentences that it's almost like a like this sensual feeling I get when I read a set. Like it's just, I don't know, maybe I'm weird and like super nerdy like that. Like, but I love that stuff so much. And it's stuff that exists in abundance in literary fiction. I also think too, one of the things that I hope to see with this increasing democratization of the genre of speculative fiction is the introduction of the same genre of like mundaneness into speculative fiction settings. So like Mad Men is cool, but like what about Mad Men on a generation ship? Right? Like tell me you wouldn't be interested in that, right?
I would read that. I mean, I like something that I've been exploring in my sci-fi reading and my fantasy reading is sci-fi and fantasy almost always have a secondary genre. So like I'm a sucker for a good found family. Is it this is sci-fi, but like Murderbot's a murder mystery. Like is it a mystery? Is it thriller? Is it, very few of them are actually, this is just about spaceships. So, like, I'm there for a family drama sci fi. I mean, I'm a sucker for alternate history. Naomi Novik's Temeraire books got me through the summer. I just listened to them. Like, Simon Vance was the only thing that was calming for months was just listening to Simon Vance be very, very British.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's something that China Mieville does expertly, right? Like, you know, Perdido Street Station is speculative fiction, but it's a horror novel. Like that book is a horror novel. Iron Council is speculative fiction, but it's a Western, right? The City and the City, speculative fiction, but it's a police procedural. Like it's a mystery. It's a murder mystery. And that I think is just really, 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 really cool. Like if you can take something like if you could take something that has the absolute sort of almost cosmic dimensions of horror as like Blood Meridian, right? Or any particularly like early Cormac McCarthy, and you can infuse it with you can take that and inject it into a speculative fiction story. Like, you found the philosopher's stone, right? Like that, that's it right there. And I mean, because one of the things too is that speculative fiction, the beauty of it is that it operates on two levels simultaneously, right? It's metaphor and reality. And you can do like there's such incredible, I love it so much because you can say if you write in a book of literary fiction, she walked outside and the sky was falling, right? That means a very different thing than in a speculative fiction book. You say she walked outside and the sky was falling. That same sentence can do like completely different things depending on the book that it's in. And that really, I don't know, that gets me going.
Just genre is fun. Like, I don't know.
It really is.
I again, pure sci-fi fantasy reader. I've read one nonfiction book in the last 10 years, one straight fiction book, and it was because it was a local author and we were doing an event with her. Otherwise, it's genre or bust. but like it's going someplace really smart with that, and it's gone. It's gone.
Don't chase it. It'll come to you. It'll come to you. But I mean, that's only to say that like my diet is so much richer because of the diversity of genre in it. And there are like, because part of it for me is that every book is a learning experience on a craft level. And one of the things that I'm consistently learning how to do and how to do better when I read literary fiction is like cool things with sentences. Like if you read Freshwater by Ekweke Emezi, I've never seen a book do what that book did. There is a passage on page 37. And I was at an event with them and I literally like courted them and I was like, page 37. They'd never met me before in their entire life. And I was like, oh my goodness, but page 37. And they knew exactly what I was talking about. But like, if you read a book like that, it's just so mind opening. And so like, that's one of the reasons why I love literary fiction the way that I do, but also too, I understand that literary fiction is more a style than a genre. You know, a lot of what we call literary fiction is just like realist fiction in the tradition of, 19th century French novels. And literary, like that's how you can call Gene Wolfe a literary science fiction novelist, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, that's my SparkNotes version of my dissertation on genre and lit fic.
I'm there for it. I'm someone who, again, is actively carving out space for genre. It's very much our store's kind of mission. I'm very sci-fi fantasy. Julie, who's my co-owner, is all romance all the time. And so we're very much like, I see that you're, reading this thing, but you should really read this other thing. Trust us. No, it's fine. So speaking of, you're reading this thing, but you should read another thing. An inseparable part of being a bookseller is every time you read something, you're like, okay, I'm loving this book. Who am I selling it to? And what am I going to recommend next? I've been pairing Riot Baby with P. Jelly Clark's Ring Shout.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like if those two books aren't twins, they're definitely siblings at the cookout. Like
yeah.
I remember reading Ring Shout. I was able to get it early and I was just like, yo, these two books are in conversation. Like these two books are talking to each other. And like that's such a wonderful feeling to have. Yeah. I love that book so much. It's if when the award circuit comes around and he ends up beating me, I would be more than honored to lose to that man.
He is brilliant. Not to this is your party, but also P. Jelly Clark, man. Brilliant.
That's the tweet.
But what would you pair Riot Baby with? Would you what's your next read? Someone says, I loved this book, but what's next for you?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. What's interesting? So there are a couple different candidates, all of whom are kind of sort of out of left field. I think Riot Baby would make for an interesting pairing with The Vegetarian by Han Kang. And the reason for that is that both tend to deal with, or both seem to be dealing with women in rebellion against social structures. And the vehicle for deliverance is a speculative one in both books. I think, there's that fascinating thematic parallel between them, but also the fragmented nature of the narratives and how that reflects on fragmented psyche of some of the characters. I just think that it'd be really interesting to read those books together. It also make for a very intense experience. So make sure that you are able to take a nap or something, or watch a Great British Bake Off afterwards or in between. Pace yourself. I think that would make for a really cool pairing. I also think it would be very interesting pairing this book with Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. I think if I saw those two books together on a high school required reading list for the summer, I'd be okay with it. I wouldn't be mad at it.
Fair. Sorry, I'm gonna find my questions. Again, I got a wild grid up here.
It's the Charlie Day Investigation Board.
It is. It really, like, it's kind of ridiculous. I was like, Tochi is so smart, and this is going to be the only time I'm ever in conversation with someone this smart. I need to be prepared. So speaking of you being brilliant, you have a really, really fancy law degree. How did that inform Riot Baby and like the process of writing? No,
definitely. No, it was, I mean, law school, that was, it was something that I wanted to do, but also part of that wanting was having grown up in a Nigerian household where the 4 career options are doctor, lawyer, engineer, and disgrace to the family. And so I figured I would split the difference because I wanted to be a writer like from a very early age. And I figured I'd split the difference by, doing the writing thing, but also going to law school. But I was, it was absolute serendipity because law school was where I got introduced to a lot of concepts of social justice and to really just social justice as a lens through which to look at institutions in America. So before then, it hadn't occurred to me that there was a broad, picture of things like institutional racism, because I'd grown up in very sort of charmed environments. I'd lived a very charmed life up until then. And, going to law school was the place where I first, realized or witnessed the experience of institutional racism, like through police. So it just not being a matter of, oh, there are bad police officers, but like, no, policing as an institution is structured to effectuate the oppression of Black Americans, right? Like the whole thing, right? Or housing discrimination. Like I didn't know that ghettos are manufactured entities. There's nothing natural about them. There's this idea that they're the result of cultural pathologies, and that's bollocks. Like they are manufactured things. They are made. Like ghettos are urban planning, right? Deciding who gets to live where. That was stuff that I learned in law school. And this isn't to say that it was in the curriculum, quite the opposite. A place like law school is very much interested, or a place like Columbia Law, at least, is very much interested in regurgitating corporate lawyers who will make lots of money that they can then donate back to the school for the endowment. They're not terribly invested in producing really like good and successful public interest lawyers, though they have no problem taking credit for us. Anyway, let me not get myself in trouble with Columbia. It was a good experience there. But law school was what directed me to criminal justice, particularly the issue of incarceration. While I was at law school, I got to take part in the mass incarceration clinic. And so I got to do actual legal work while a student. And I worked on a habeas corpus case, and we were able to get our client conditional release, which happens in like 0.2% of habeas corpus cases. It was wild. This man had been unjustly imprisoned in Connecticut for like 18 years and the thing about a habeas corpus case is there's a very strict order of proceedings that you have to go through. Like there's the trial and then the appeal. There's a first evidentiary hearing, then there's another evidentiary hearing, and there's a specific order because of various federal laws that we have that say if you don't do it in this particular order, your whole case fails. So I got to work on that. Law school was the first time that I visited Rikers. I was working with another student on class actions for prisoners that were filing a brutality case against the correctional officers. So that was my first real up close and personal contact with prison as a system, but also that specific facility of Rikers. And so I continued on that track after law school. I worked with the Attorney General's office, their Civil Rights Bureau, and then I was with the Legal Aid Society's Parole Revocation Defense Unit. And so I'm literally, because of law school, I get to literally be on the ground in the trenches where so much of this incredible work is being done. And all of that infuses the writing, because writing for me is a way for me to make sense of the world around me. It's a way to sort of organize the world. And so as I'm, as I'm working with clients and as I'm experiencing various things from being inside these facilities, I know automatically that I have to write about it somehow, right? And I mean, and sort of tying it back to speculative fiction, there were a number of ways in which I could have sort of transmogrified my experience with carceral facilities. And one way I could have written some 500-page tome about crime and punishment, but like the Russians already did that, right? So I figured, I cut my teeth doing speculative fiction. Why not try this through that lens? So yeah, no, that's part of how the law degree figures into it. Also, it gives me a nice little bit of security, because in case this rap stuff don't work out, I do have this other career to fall back on.
Where am I going? Oh, we're getting pretty close to opening up to the Q&A portion to our, folks. We've got a couple of pre-submitted questions. We've got a couple of, questions in the comments, the Q&A box over here. If you are watching and would like to drop a question in the Q&A box, you may ask a question of Tochi and we will do our best to get it answered. But while people are doing that, I was wondering, I've heard you speak on this book a lot. I researched. I was so ready. Rushi, I remember you mentioning that she kept telling you, make it angrier, like this book can be angrier. So I know that she added on that level. What is your favorite thing that got cut from Riot Baby that didn't make it into the final, finished manuscript?
There's one thing that leaps immediately to mind, but it's the type of thing that Roshi was absolutely right in advocating for this thing to be cut. Like, I know for a fact that it was absolutely the right decision, but it was the one thing that I've cut in my entire writing career that it actually hurt to lose. And it was a pairing of scenes involving the character of Jamila, who runs the bodega that Kev frequents on occasion, and who he is sort of falling for around the time of his arrest. And I can't go in. I won't go into details, but the writing in those scenes, just chef's kiss. It was so good. It was but it was the type of thing that ultimately detracted from the overall story, because in many ways the stuff that would be dealt with in those scenes opened more doors than the novella had space to walk through. It posed more questions than the novella had space to answer. And that was the very first time that I'd encountered something like that in my writing. Generally, when I'm writing a thing, even as I'm editing, I have a good idea of the general shape of it and the amount of space in which I get to deal with various themes or questions or what have you. And this was the very first time where I had a thing that was literally on the verge of bursting at the seams. And we had to thematically make space for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, whew, I mean, you're just gonna have to take my word for it that it was gorgeous writing.
I absolutely believe you, because truly, I re-listened to the audiobook before this, because I'm slowest reader in book selling. I was kind of I can spend 5 days reading this, or I can spend 4 hours listening to it. You do a beautiful job reading it, by the way. And I will say, there are a lot of things about Kev's story that are really, really jarring. You see when Ella leaves, the loss of protection and how his life slowly devolves, and it's this snowball of kind of a little wrong, and just until he's in Rikers. And I think that the most painful loss of potential in Riot Baby is the clear love story that we lost. That kind of youthful flirtation, like where's this going, what's our future, is this the mother of my children, like will we own a bodega, am I going to go to college, and like how do we grow, like I don't know, like it makes me so sad. Like a lot of Kev's life is heartbreaking, and then just looking at how it impacts this other like constant in his life, like clearly like this light in his life. I don't know, just
Yeah, no, it like that is just like even looking back on it now and thinking back on it now, like that was, it wasn't necessarily like tough to write, but it was the type of thing that if I gave myself time and gave myself space and like stepped back for a second and thought about what I was and like really thought about what I was putting this poor boy through, that it was just like, oh my goodness, Tochi, can you like give him some sort of, can you just like, dang, that's a lot. But I think it's really interesting. The thing that it reminded me of just now was a very fascinating thing that happens in Moonlight, which is that, we see Mahershala Ali's character a lot in Act One, in like the first part, and he's very present in Chiron's life. And then in Act Three, he's just gone. No explanation. Janelle Monáe's character doesn't say, oh, like he went here, or like this is where he's at now, or RIP, or any, he's just gone. And in my sort of just personal life experience, there have been so many instances where somebody who's been in my life, and particularly somebody who's been active in my life, has just gone, has just vanished, and that very much reflects the reality. And it's almost as though there are no questions asked. It's just one day this person isn't there anymore. And I think that was something that ended up being the case with Kev and Jamila, in part because of that cut. And I think this was something that Roshi sort of had in mind, that even I didn't necessarily see at the time, was that idea of possibility being aborted is like literalized in the book. And we see him dreaming, literally, like as he's being tackled in the bodega, we see him like, this could have been like this is what could have been. But yeah, no, that was a lot. That was a lot.
yeah, so big, so I am going to sneak into this comments box and see what people would like to know from you. What initially compelled you to become a writer?
So I actually, very easy answer to this, mom. Like that's literally what it was. When I was a kid, wanted to be a comic book artist. Like that was my dream, because I loved to draw. And mom had this second job as we would clean office buildings sort of around the state of Connecticut. And in all these places, the people were getting ready to throw out these 3-ring binders that were just full of blank paper. And mom saw that they were getting ready to throw these out, and she was like, no, let me take them home for my son who loves to draw. And so I would fill these things up. And there would be like 500 pages in each binder, and I would fill one up in like 3 weeks. And so mom, one day, I might have been, 8 or something like that. And she says, Tochi, you have all these characters that you're drawing. Why not write stories for them? And at the time I was like, mom, I just want to draw. Like, why are you giving me homework? Can I live? Like, what's going on? But I'm loath to disobey my mom. And so I started writing like single paragraph summaries of their adventures. And then one paragraph became 2, became 3. And then they started meeting each other. And I was like, okay, this is something. This is interesting. And then, fast forward to high school. I forget whether it's sophomore or junior year. It's spring break. I'm lying on the couch in the living room, and I'm reading The Dragon Reborn by Robert Jordan, book 3 in his Wheel of Time series, his incredible, just like so formative in my development, Wheel of Time series. And I finished the book. I turned the last page, I closed the cover, and I can still see the final scene in front of me. It's almost like it's a hallucination. I can literally still see, I can hear it, everything. And that had never happened to me before, like in a book. And in that moment, I realized, wait a second, somebody did this to me, which means I can maybe do this to somebody else. And that was my radioactive spider moment as a writer.
So this actually, I'm going to bounce right into another question because it's like you set me up for this perfectly. One of our pre-submitted questions was, do you ever visualize a film when you're writing? Do you visualize people you know, or do you create images in your mind?
So I work a lot off of images. Oftentimes there'll be images that I create, but they'll often be images inspired by things that I've seen or things that I've read or what have you. Oftentimes it's images that'll drive the very creation of a story, of a whole, book. With Beast Made of Night, my debut novel, for instance, it started with this image in my head of a kid facing off against a giant shadow beast. And I knew nothing else. I didn't know the kid's name. I didn't know what he was doing in what looked like a palace room. I didn't know how he was going to beat this giant shadow monster. And so much of the writing of the story is working my way to that image. It's like figuring out that image. Like answering the question that is that image. With War Girls, the very first scene was, and this ended up being the very first scene in the book, was Onyi, one of the main characters, literally sitting at a workstation, tinkering with her arm, like tinkering with her metal arm. She has her arm detached and like propped up on this desk, and she's literally like a mechanic tinkering with it. And I was like, that's such a fascinating and dynamic image. What's going on there, right? And so writing the book is a way for me to answer that question. I also like to visualize and choreograph when I write. If I'm blocked on a scene, it's often because I don't know how exactly that scene is going to happen or who is moving about where in the scene. And if I can sort of plot that out in my head, who moves to the window when? What do they do when they get to the window? What's on the table? Does anything get picked up on the table, et cetera, et cetera? Once I have all that like playing in my head, then it becomes much easier for me to like actually write the story, because I was raised on movies and TV. As much as I read, I was a Cartoon Network kid. So oftentimes I almost have to visualize something before I can write it.
Um, which writers living today do you love? Are there authors who are automatic buys for you?
Marlon James, easily, hands down. A Brief History of Seven Killings is one of the greatest books that I've read in the past decade, hands down, easily. That book, the audacity of that book, like, how dare, like, and even just think of it on a premise level, right? Imagine Faulkner's As I Lay Dying, right? Except that instead of the center event being Addie Bundren's funeral, the center event is an assassination attempt on Bob Marley in 1976. And it's written 85% in Jamaican patois. Like, what on earth? How dare that book? I didn't know you could do that, right? Like, that, just off of that alone, insta-buy, right? And he most recently came out with Black Leopard, Red Wolf, the first in his Dark Star trilogy, which is just like, it's got some of the dopest monsters I've ever read in a fantasy novel. It's so good. Another, and it's funny because this book literally just came in the mail today, is Viet Thanh Nguyen, who wrote The Sympathizer, which won the Pulitzer back in like 2015, 2016, thereabouts, and is like ridiculously good. And I've read like just about all his other stuff. So The Refugees, his short story collection. He had a nonfiction book, Nothing Ever Dies, that was about memory and Vietnam, and how the Vietnam War gets remembered and memorialized, and not just in terms of individuals, but also in terms of like Hollywood, for instance, like how the American sort of entertainment industrial complex has bludgeoned the Vietnam War into a very specific mnemonic artifact, right? And what does that mean for the people on the other side who experienced, the other side of the napalm and the bombings and all of that stuff and the American occupation? and all of that. He has another novel coming out, the sequel to The Sympathizer, and it's titled The Committed. And and I think officially it comes out March 4th, but I managed to get an early copy and it literally just landed in my mailbox today. And so I cannot wait to jump in. Another Insta buy, and I mentioned them before, Akweke Emezi. They just had, I think their most recent novel is The Death of Vivek Oji. They are the things that they're able to do with the English language. It's just like, how
Right.
how it's always like, I always know I'm good when you know you're going to be blown away before even knowing anything about a book. You just know, oh, this is the person behind that book. Okay, I know this is going to be a life-changing experience. That's what Akweke Emezi is for me.
All right, we have about 5 minutes left. So I would love to try and get one more reader question in. And I would like to take some time at the end for you to talk about your current projects and what you have forthcoming. You have a nonfiction coming out, if I recall.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, so let's talk about what you have coming out next, but let me find you one more. I was introduced to your works through your YA novel, War Girls. The idea of family are so central to it, just as in Riot Baby, although obviously different. Can you talk about this common through line?
Oh man, I love my family so much. Like, they're the most important thing in the world to me. And one thing, so before law school, I went to film school. And one of the things that I was challenged to do in film school, and I think this was just an offhand comment from a professor one day, was write into your fears. And I found that when I did that, albeit in the form of screenplays and stage plays and TV projects, it would produce my best writing, my most emotionally grounded, my most fully realized. And so I took that back with me into my prose and I wrote it into my fears. And I realized almost consistently, one of my greatest fears is like losing my family or like anything happening to my family. And so if I write into that, if I like head straight into that fear and start to dissect it through these characters and start to sort of literalize that fear vicariously through them, it produces some of my most like compelling work. And I find that it's a way for me to talk about what family means to me through these characters. And like even with Beast Made of Night and Crown of Thunder, like it's the found family trope, right? You have these people that are not blood related, but are brought together by circumstance. They're in this foxhole together by virtue of being gifted with these special powers that of course put them on the lowest rung of the ladder in terms of their social status, and they come together because they're both sort of suffering together. Just very briefly, there I saw a hilarious TikTok that my youngest sister sent me earlier today, that was like, the question was, what is something that's normal in your country that is not normal in other countries? And the person was like, suffering. I'm from Nigeria. Every Nigerian has either suffered, is currently suffering, or is on their way to suffer. In fact, when we greet each other, we say, have you suffered today? And I was like, that's it. It was hilarious. I died, but it was like the realest thing ever. But yeah, so yeah, suffering. So my nonfiction book. I do have a nonfiction book dropping in April. The title is Skinfolk, and it at its core is a literary analysis of Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, but it also spins out into memoir and drills down into the question of my own sort of education into Blackness, particularly American Blackness, being a Nigerian American, the son of immigrants. What does it mean to live in a country and to grow in a country as a Black person that has where Blackness is such a fraught concept and so laden with meaning? So that's the book. It comes out in April from Fiction Advocate. You can buy it just about everywhere books are sold, or pre-order it at least everywhere books are sold.
Do you want to talk about the cool thing that you did today?
Oh, yes, very briefly. So I am a huge Marvel head, like huge, 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 huge. Like I could spend another hour literally talking about how much I love Marvel comics. And anyway, earlier today, this dropped Marvel's Voices Legacy #1. It is an anthology featuring short stories from various writers, including yours truly. Um, Yes, I have a story starring Domino, which over the course of my writing became one of my all-time favorite characters ever. I mean, it's a collection of incredible writing from incredible writers, and to have my name on a Marvel comic now is literally like it's the coolest thing I've ever done. I've done a
Super
lot
cool.
of dope stuff in my career. This is the coolest thing I've ever done.
It is so cool. And I love Marvel has been consistently hiring like real like book authors like Nettie Okorafor's done comics.
LL McKinney.
Hmm?
LL McKinney. She just dropped Nubia for DC. Yeah.
And
just today.
We Were 8 Years in Power.
Oh, Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Thank
you. Yes. Oh, yeah. Of course. Him. Yeah.
Yeah, him. That dude.
Yeah. That guy. That guy.
But we're over now. Like we have run over time.
Of course.
So I wanted to thank you so much for joining us and talking books and sci-fi and all of your hard and amazing work with us. Thank you to everyone who came tonight. Thank you to Boston.com for giving me this amazing opportunity to hang out with awesome, like-minded people. Thank you guys. Have such a good night.
This was such a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.